Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Mias, and today I'm actually going to be comparing every single Solemn trap card, well, counter trap card. Solemn Scolding, Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment, and Solemn Strike. Which one is the best for you? Which one should you play? That's basically the theme of today's video. But before I start, friendly reminder to like and subscribe, because it motivates me a lot to keep making videos like these, and yet let's jump right into it. Alright, so for starters, they fulfill completely different requirements, and they also have completely different costs and activation requirements. So for Solemn Strike, you basically have to pay 1,500 life points. For Solemn Warning, you have to pay 2,000, Solemn Scolding is a 3,000 payment, and Solemn Judgment is the most interesting one because it doesn't have a fixed amount like life points that you have to pay. It's basically just half of your current life points, meaning that if you have 8,000 and you're paying half, you're paying 4,000, which honestly is going to be the case more often than not. Pretty much always going to be using Judgment on like turn 1 against blowout cards before you even take a single damage. But the cool thing about Judgment is that even if you only have 1 life point, you are allowed to use Judgment, pay half of your life points, and 1 divided by 2 is apparently 1 because decimal values wouldn't exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! It'd make no sense to kind of keep track of 0.5 and stuff like that, and it's always rounded up. It wouldn't be 1 divided by 2 equals 0, but rather equals 1. And also, you can always use Judgment, but you can't always use Strike as Warning and Solemn Scolding. So, for example, if you have exactly 1,500 life points, you technically are allowed to use Strike, but it would completely kill you. And if you have 1,400 life points or less, you are simply not allowed to use the card in the first place. Now that this is out of the way, let's actually get into the first Solemn that I'm going to be talking about, and I think it is the worst Solemn in the entire game, and that is Solemn Scolding. Now, first of all, you have to pay 3,000 life points to use this card, which is a lot. It's a lot of money, and you can only use this while it is the only set card in your back row. And I think you can already predict what I'm about to say next, but if you draw 2 copies of Solemn Scolding, one of them is going to be really unlucky and really sad that he won't be able to join his brother in the back row, since obviously they kind of turn themselves off each other, which is a bit weird. And historically speaking, Solemn Scolding has never really seen a lot of play. It only saw play in, I think, 1 top tier pendulum deck once, and also a spiral deck when it was kind of at full power. But ever since Solemn Judgment kind of existed in the game, actually got unbanned because it was banned for so many years, people just completely forgot that Scolding even existed, even though it negates the most amount of things. It negates summons, monster effects, spells, and traps. It's basically the combination of every single Solemn at once, but with the drawback of only being able to be used while you control no other set cards in your back row. So obviously if you're playing a control deck, Solemn Scolding is absolutely not for you. Now, Warning would be the second one, and that one is interesting. It negates anything that is related to a summon, basically. I don't know why I had to mess that one up that much. It negates normal summons as well, which is really interesting, and then inherent special summons, and also any card or effect, basically spell, trap, or monster, that would actually try to summon a monster. Meaning that you can negate Soul Charge, you can negate Denko Sekka, you can negate Pendulum Summons, but that's kind of all you can do, and you have to pay 2,000 life points for that. Meaning that if you're going second and your opponent again has all the summons that he needs already and doesn't have to commit to more, Solemn Warning is basically just sitting there and kind of doing nothing, which I don't think is the best deal. Now we're actually going to jump into the bomb Solemns, the 2 best ones, and the first one would be Solemn Judgment. It can actually negate a lot of things. It can negate spell and trap card activations, and I said activations, not effects, so you can't really negate a breakthrough skill in the graveyard, for example, and you can also negate inherent summons as well, just like Solemn Warning does, except that you can't really negate something like a monster effect that would try to negate a summon, but that doesn't really happen that much. Like, for example, a Yang Zing effect in the graveyard, you can Warning that, but you can't really negate that with Solemn Judgment. But is that really going to change anything to your life? Probably not. So I think Judgment is objectively better than Warning, especially since you can play 3 Warning in conjunction to 3 Strike in your deck. You would have to also play Judgment, which I feel like would be way too much, especially if you're playing Strike as well, would be like 9 Solemns. You basically have to pay like 20 billion life points, and where are going to be the proactive spot removals and all of that? It's going to be kind of unrealistic. But Solemn Judgment being able to negate the blowout cards like Dark Ruler No More, Evenly Matched, Lightning Storm, Harpy's Feather Duster, all of that is just gigantic, and the fact that you can protect your back row from that, for example, if you're playing Altergeist, or if you can protect your Floodgates if you're playing something like a Guru deck, well, it's going to be so good because now your Floodgates are actually having their full effect on your opponent, and obviously his engine will probably not be able to kind of counter it in case he's playing something like a combo deck. The one drawback that Judgement has, on top of obviously having to usually pay 4,000 life points, is again the fact that it doesn't pay, well, it doesn't actually negate monster effects that are on the field or that are going to happen, meaning that if your opponent, let's just say, has a bunch of negates already there, like Vortex, Endymion, Jackal King, Infinity, whatever, and then you have something like a Judgement and, I don't know, Needle Sealing, that doesn't really do anything. It's not going to be able to negate any monster effect, but Solemn Strike would be able to do that, so that is something that the cheapest Solemn can actually do that the most expensive quote-unquote cannot. So that's kind of a bummer, right? And you already guessed it, but my favorite Solemn is Solemn Strike. Solemn Strike has to pay 1,500 life points, and this time you cannot negate spells and traps, and you cannot negate normal summons, which is really interesting because all 3 other Solemns can. So this time, if you only have Strike and you get Dencode, too bad for you. Denkuchile, pretty good card, especially since you can add it from anywhere into your hand at any time you please. Shoutouts to the remote duel champion. But yeah, I mean, I love Solemn Strike so much. I mean, in conjunction with the cards like Needle Sealing, Torrential Tribute, Zeus even, it's just such a blowout. Your opponent can have all the negates in the world, and only a counter trap can, you know, counter another counter trap. It's going to be really impossible for your opponent playing like Pendulums, for example, to pretty much negate your Solemn Strike plus, I don't know, Needle Sealing combo, for example. In conclusion, I wouldn't even try to play Solemn Scolding or Solemn Warning ever. However, if you are trying to play a really heavy back row deck that is going first, I seriously recommend Solemn Judgement, as it can negate the huge blowout cards like Duster, Lightning Storm, etc. And if you are trying to make your deck better going second, and you want a counter trap that just kind of does a lot in one, while kind of also being cheap, Solemn Strike is probably the best call for you. And also, it's pretty easy to mix Strike and Judgement at the same time, but I want to say that more decks can afford to play Strike than Judgement because of the fact that Strike is also flexible going second, whereas Judgement is kind of not the case. So that's all I had to say for this Solemn kind of comparison video. If you guys have any comments, suggestions, ideas, or whatever, definitely let me know in the comment section below, please. I would love to hear your suggestions. And I mean, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all the beautiful package, and I will see you next time. Peace.